Yá'át'ééh. Good morning, my relatives. This is Mark Charles. It is Thursday, March 21st, which is actually, believe it or not, the third day of spring already. And I'm sitting down with my second cup of coffee, and I wanted to talk with you about a few things. But yeah, before I begin, let me do like I always do and acknowledge that I'm speaking to you from Piscataway lands. The Piscataway are the nation that they were living here, hunting here, farming here, and fishing here. They were here long before Columbus got lost at sea, and they're still here. So I want to honor the Piscataway as the hosts of the land where I'm living. I want to thank them for their stewardship of these lands and just state how humbled I am to be living on these lands today. They're now known as Washington to my Navajo people, or Washington D.C. to most Americans, but that's where I live today, and I want to honor the Piscataway as the host of these lands. So anyway, my relatives, you'll notice I said in my description for this podcast that this is the third day of spring. And if you're thinking, wait, isn't March 21st usually the first day of spring? Doesn't spring come on March 21st? Well, there's a few factors to it. One is that this is a leap year. And so that brings spring earlier. And spring doesn't actually always come on the 21st. It comes on sometimes on the 20th and oftentimes on the 21st. But because the actual day, the number of times the sun's or the Earth circulates around the sun, orbits the sun, is not exactly 365 days. We need to have a leap year, and so it adjusts a little bit every year. And so the actual time and date of spring is not always on the 21st. Anyway, if you're interested in learning a little more about that, there were several articles that were out in the news spaces, and CBS News published this one called "The First Day of Spring in 2024 was a day earlier than typical years. Here's why." And it just kind of explains how spring works, and they talk about the difference between the actual spring based on the orbit of the Earth and the meteorologist spring, which is based on when it starts feeling warm. Um, Anyway, I'm enjoying my second cup of coffee. I hope you have a cup of whatever your favorite morning hot beverage is, and I'm glad you can join me for a few minutes. Today, I want to talk about loneliness. And this is something I've done a fair amount of thinking about. But if you've been following the news, and this isn't even just the current news, but over the past several years, especially during and after COVID, there's been a lot of reports about loneliness just reaching absolutely epidemic levels in our country and even around the globe, in different parts of the globe. And I want to talk about that. I want to talk about why that is, the effects that's having on our society and on us individually, what we can do to be less lonely, and just to be encouraging of people to step out of our bubbles. I also I want to start by just sharing a few pictures, right? Let's start with a few feel good moments here. Susan, Yá'át'ééh, thank you for joining me this morning. I'm glad you could be on today. Yá'át'ééh, thanks for joining me. Glad you could be here. I want to show you just a few photos, and one of the reasons I want to do this is because I love taking photos. I walk around. I usually have my cell phone with me, and I'll just stop if something strikes me, and I'll take a picture. And one of my favorite seasons in Washington, D.C. is spring. I absolutely love spring here. Coming from the Southwest, the high desert where it's a drought and not many things grow unless you water them very intentionally, seeing the flowers bloom in DC for these past 10 years every spring has just been so refreshing for my soul. And so, yeah, spring is one of my favorite seasons here. And of course, you can't be in DC and not notice the cherry blossoms and all the other flowers that are blooming here. So here's just a few of the pictures that I took. I'm not even down by where the Cherry Blossom Festival is, but just some trees on my walk going to and from my office to my house, as well as going just around my neighborhood. And you can see there's a lot of really pretty cherry blossoms out, and as well as other flowers. And it's a very beautiful time of year here. I love this time of year here in DC. The other day, I also I as you know, I don't get a chance to get out and see the sunrise very much, but I was out and was able to see this on the horizon as I was coming home. And it's just a beautiful morning sunrise in DC here. And then I want to share one other picture with you. This is a picture I take fairly frequently, right? This is when I go watch the sunrise. I usually take a picture from this point, looking out over the Potomac River. And this is, you can see the sun's right there in the middle. And I take this picture because I like to kind of watch how the sun travels up and down the horizon as the seasons change. And so you can see it moving further north in the spring and summer and further south in the fall and winter. And I really enjoy kind of tracking that. But my daughter is in a photography class, and she's been kind of training me and giving me some tips on things she's learning in her class. And one of the things that she learned is that when you take photos, you should actually not center them. You should take them off to a third, either both up from vertically as well as horizontally. And so she recommended that. So, right, what I did for this photo, just so I can show you how it looks differently, I took the exact same photo and I just cropped it. And I moved the sun from the middle more to the side and a little more vertically. And I'm going to show you the exact same photo just with it cropped. And you can see how the photo looks different, right? You can see the way that it shows a different focal point, even though it's the exact same picture. In this photo, you see much more of the shadows of those tree branches that the sun's rising behind. It catches your eye a little bit more. I'm like, wow, that's really kind of cool. So anyway, I just thought I'd share that with you. Something I'm learning from my daughter. I love taking photos. I've not trained as a photographer or as any kind of art training, but as my daughter's learning these, and my father's also a photographer, and so he probably told me this at some point too, but I don't remember, and I usually put things in the middle. So anyway, I may try to off-center my photos a little bit more and see how they end up appearing, but just thought I would share that with you. And then I just want to share this photo one more time because I love it. I took this photo with my phone this morning, and I took it in portrait mode, where when you do a portrait mode, what it does is it focuses on the thing in the middle or on the front, and then it kind of blurs the stuff in the background. And I love that effect, especially with flowers. And so this is one of my favorite pictures that I actually took this morning when I was walking to my office, going to my office this morning. Anyway, those are just a few things I thought I'd share with you. But what I want to talk about, and again, I want to talk about loneliness. And for those of you who have heard me speak before, you know I share about the move my family and I made from Denver, Colorado, back to the Navajo Nation. And we moved from the middle of a large western city onto the reservation. We were 6 miles off the nearest paved road on a dirt road. We had no running water, no electricity. We were living in a one-room hogan. We had to haul our water. We used an outhouse. Our neighbors were rug weavers and shepherds. And I talk about how as we prepared for that move, my family and my wife and I prepared to live off the grid. We prepared to haul water. We prepared for all of the things that we were going to be experiencing there. But the thing that took us most by surprise, and actually one of the hardest things about living there, was the loneliness. I wasn't so ill prepared for how incredibly lonely it was on the reservation. Not just the fact that we lived on a sheep camp 6 miles off the paved road, 20 miles, 30 miles from the nearest town. Our neighbors were miles apart. But the fact that almost nobody ever came onto the reservation to visit us. You know, you've heard me say that the only people we saw who were not natives living near us were people who came to give us charity or people who came to take our picture, right? No one came to build relationship or to really invest in us in any meaningful way. And over the years, it felt increasingly lonely. even as we got more connected with our community there and the people we lived nearby, but we felt this intense loneliness and isolation from the rest of the nation as we were living there. And it was really kind of a fascinating experience. And then moving from there, we moved from that Hogan into Fort Defiance, where we lived for another 8 years. And while we weren't as lonely there because we had a lot more neighbors and we were in a small village on the reservation and we were able to get out more, we didn't feel that loneliness, the kind of the isolation of just being alone. But we did feel, it continued, because we were on the reservation, we continued to feel this loneliness of, we're in this massive country, 300 plus million people, and nobody knows us. Nobody comes to see us except to give us charity or to take our picture. And there was this real intense isolation from the rest of the nation while living there. And so I've, because of that experience, I've been very attuned to senses of loneliness and understanding loneliness more, and kind of looking at it more and even being aware of it. And right, COVID was another incredibly isolating and lonely experience that didn't just grip us here in the US, but it really gripped the globe, because of the way it spread, because of the social isolation that was necessary, because of the mask wearing, right? It so isolated us from one another and caused an exacerbated loneliness to what today is being reported as epidemic levels of loneliness in the nation. And the first article I want to share with you is from the Daily Pennsylvanian. It's a student newspaper at the University of Penn in Philadelphia, not too far from us. And it was written in 2021. And the title of the article is AirPods, the New Age of Being Antisocial in a Generation of Loneliness. And it talks about how on not just the University of Penn, although that's where the author was attending school at the time, and that's where her context was for writing the paper or the article, but this is being reported in colleges all around the country, where people are, they're wearing their iPods and they're living in their technological bubbles, and there's so less social interaction on these college campuses, right? Where young people are around people their own age, they're around people who study things they're studying, they're around, they're living in dorms and in apartments, and they're all part of this community, which for so many of us was this massive kind of social overload, right? I remember my years at UCLA, and it was so many people, and so I loved every minute of it because I'm such an extrovert, and I remember all of those things about that. And yet for today, as I talk to not just my own kids, but other people who have gone to college in the past few years, before, during, and after COVID, right? It's like things have so radically changed. Roommates can hardly talk to each other at times. Everyone's walking around campus wearing their earphones, and there's just this deep sense of isolation. And there's a quote that was put in this article. I just want to read it for you. It says, an unsaid rule when people wear iPods or headphones in public is that you don't approach them. We all voluntarily encase ourselves in a tiny Bluetooth bubble. I love her framing of it there. I don't know if she's the first one to use that. That's the first time I ever heard that term, and I loved it. In all honesty, I can say that I am guilty of this as well. There are multiple occurrences where I haven't approached or said hi to someone I knew on Locust Walk. Apparently that's a walk through UPenn, or in Starbucks, because of the inconvenience it would be to take out my AirPods and for them to take out theirs. And she talked about how she was just so accustomed to walking around campus with your AirPods in and not interacting or talking with anybody. And yet, when you look at statistics of loneliness, right? And this is statistics even just in the past few years. 1 in 2 adults, people over the age of 18, report being lonely. And of the Gen Z generation, right? 18-year-olds and right around there, 73%, according to some publication, 73% of Gen Z people report experiencing loneliness. And so obviously there's a massive problem that we're facing. And just noticing it, what this author wrote at the University of Penn of what she observed on campus is just really, it's just the tip of the iceberg. As I did more research on this, in 2023, a year ago, the US Surgeon General released an advisory. It was called The Healing Effects of Social Connection. And it was an advisory. It was almost like a warning or an alert about, hey, there was a massive problem going on, an epidemic level of loneliness that is happening. And we need to find ways to address it. And just want to read a few things from this advisory so you can understand what's going on right now. So one thing this advisory said is social networks are getting smaller. From 2003 to 2020, social isolation measured by the average time spent alone increased. In 2003, it was 285 minutes a day or 142 and a half hours a month. In 2019, there was 309 minutes a day and 154 and a half hours a month. And it continued to increase in 2020 to 333 minutes a day and 166 and a half hours a month. This is an increase of 24 hours per month spent alone over the course of 2 decades. It went on to say at the same time, the amount of time respondents engaged with friends in person decreased, and this is socially and in person decreased. In 2003, it was an average of 60 minutes a day, 30 hours a month. In 2020, it was 20 minutes a day, 10 hours a month. A decrease of 20 hours per month spent engaging in person with friends over the past 2 decades. And it says this decline is starkest for young people ages 15 to 24. For this age group, time spent in person with friends has reduced by nearly 70% over almost 2 decades, from roughly nearly 150 minutes per day in 2003 to 40 minutes per day in 2020. Right? And this is the age group where, and actually all of us, it's not just the young people, it's all of us as a nation, we are experiencing an epidemic level of loneliness. The advisory went on to state that loneliness and social isolation increase the risk for premature death by 26% and 29% respectively. More broadly, lacking social connection can increase the risk for premature death as much as smoking up to 15 cigarettes a day. Just think about that. Loneliness can increase the risk for premature death on the same level that smoking 15 cigarettes a day puts you at risk for premature death. In addition, poor or insufficient social connection is associated with increase of risk of disease, including 29% of increased risk of heart disease and 32% increased risk of stroke. It's associated with increased risk for anxiety, depression, and dementia, and many, many other health problems. Now, I want to also say something else because it goes on to talk about technology. The same advisory says technologies are pervasive in our lives. Nearly all teens and adults under 65, 96 to 99%, and 75% of adults 65 and over say that they use the internet. Americans spend an average of 6 hours per day on digital media. 1 in 3 U.S. adults 18 and over report that they are online almost constantly, and the percentage of teens ages 13 to 17 who say they are online almost constantly has doubled since 2015. When looking at social media specifically, the percentage of U.S. adults 18 and over who reported using social media increased from 5% in 2005 to roughly 80% in 2019. Among teens ages 13 to 17, 95% report using social media as of 2022, with more than half reporting it would be hard to give up. Although technology adoption is relatively high among all groups, Americans with disabilities, adults with lower incomes, and Americans from rural areas continue to experience a persistent, albeit shrinking, digital divide. So again, the point is technology is becoming increasingly pervasive in this, and I need to make sure my phone doesn't disconnect. And so as our use of technology, our dependence of technology, our engagement on social media, which for many people can feel like we're interacting, it does not decrease the sense of loneliness that people feel. The advisory went on to say, a fraying of the social fabric can also be seen broadly in society. Trust in each other and major institutions is at near historic lows. Polls conducted in 1972 show that roughly 45% of Americans felt they could reliably trust other Americans. However, that proportion shrank to nearly 30% in 2016. It's striking they used 2016 as the data point there, because what happened in 2016? That was the year. Sorry about that. I lost the signal here in my. But 2016 was the year that we elected Donald Trump. Right? That was the year we elected Donald Trump. And so the fact that, and sorry, I have to fix this. We'll just leave it that way. We'll leave this picture behind me. And so there's this massive distrust in American society as our politics have become increasingly polarized. And I actually remember waking up the morning after Donald Trump was elected. And I went to bed convinced that Hillary was going to win. And I woke up and Donald was elected. And I looked around and I realized I was flying to Chicago that day. And I remember just looking on the airplane as I was flying there and walking around the airport thinking, half of these people voted for this man. And I literally felt the distrust increasing in me as that went on. And of course, that polar divide has gotten even worse in the years since then. And this adds to our deep sense of loneliness. So I'm laying all this out because there is an absolute problem. I'm giving you an NPR article, which kind of summarizes some of the advisory that I gave to you. And I'm also going to give you a PBS News interview with an expert on loneliness and a professor who teaches a class, I think at Yale, if I remember correctly. And I welcome you to look at both of these resources as well, and they just lay out how these things are such a problem. And so what I want to talk about today is how do we deal with this? Not even how do we fix our nation, but how do we ourselves stop ourselves or hinder or prevent ourselves from living these increasingly isolated lives, right? And I have some earbuds, right? I have some Google Pixel earbuds, and I'll be honest, I love the noise canceling feature on them. I live in a fairly, our house is close to a fairly major road. There's traffic going on. If I want to focus on something working from my office here, I love to put on my earbuds, and even not have music on, but just have the noise canceling on so that I don't hear all the noise going on. I love wearing them when I go out and listening to podcasts or news updates and things like that, or even just music. I love having them on and using them for that. And yeah, I find that there are ways that my earbuds can increase my productivity in my work. as I'm able to kind of isolate myself a bit more and not have the distraction of noise going on in my environment distract me when I'm trying to focus doing some writing or doing something else. But I also know that wearing these earbuds they're almost like this billboard that says, hey, don't bother me. One of the articles that I'm going to share with you is called The Lonely World of Earbuds. And it goes all the way back to the invention of the Walkman, and how even the people who invented the Sony Walkman back in like the 70s or 80s, whenever that was, were realizing how having a personal stereo or cassette player that you carry around with you could be isolating. And they were concerned about that as they were developing the first Sony Walkman and the next one soon after that. It talks about, we've talked about how we've always had these ways of kind of saying, don't bother me, don't engage with me. There's this mention in the article about when you used to ride the public transportation, you would buy a newspaper, and holding a newspaper and reading it or pretending to read it was a way to say to those around you, hey, don't bother me right now, because I don't want to talk to anyone. And it was a way to kind of communicate, just let me be in my own space right now. And that's changed, right? People are buying less newspapers. We don't use that near as much. But again, how often do we see people with the white Apple AirPods in their ears? And it's this understanding that, yeah, they're not listening. There's a Bluetooth bubble around them that they don't want to be bothered, even though they're out in public. And so one of the things that I want just to encourage us to do, and I'm not saying don't use noise canceling headphones ever or don't use earbuds at all, but I think it's important that we don't lose the kind of contextual engagement that happens when we're just out in public, right? Whether it's talking to the barista at the coffee shop or engaging with saying hi to someone we recognize on the street, or greeting people who who we work with, or we walk into an office, and just being some of that. And I've even read some reports where even just having that kind of polite conversation, which again, with our earbuds in and with our faces in our technology, we don't do that, right? We walk by people. We all have our little bubbles that we're living in, these individual bubbles, and we're not engaging anymore, even in a very public space. And what that does is it takes away our sense of that we're part of a community. And that leads to us feeling even more and more isolated. When we really are, we're constructing a world where you don't have to talk to anybody that you don't want to, right? You can go to a fast food restaurant and place your order on a kiosk and pick it up and walk out, right? You can go through the drive-through and talk to a microphone and then pick up your bag and go to your home. You can wear your earbuds and just advertise to everyone on the street, don't talk to me, I'm listening to something, or I'm somewhere else, I'm not here for public engagement. We can even do that sitting in our own houses with roommates and family, right, where we all are in our own little space and we don't engage with one another. We can do that when we're out to dinner or eating in restaurants, and we do that, and we create these spaces where we're trying not to interact with people, but that in and of itself is fueling our sense of loneliness. And so something we have to do, and this actually will begin requiring us to do intentional work, is to not put in our AirPods, not put in our earbuds, to actually try to engage with people when we're out on the street, to say good morning, even if it feels weird, to greet people as we walk by them, to wave or acknowledge, right, when we're out in public. And then even over time to invest energy to get to know people. Not that we have to become deep friends with everyone around us, but if we can just engage more. And one of the things I love about where we live now is as we've lived in this neighborhood for 10 years, we've lived in the same neighborhood for almost a decade now. And we're really getting to know the people, and our neighborhood is still very transient. There's a lot of people who move in and out, and there's a lot of kind of upheaval in our neighborhood, but we're getting to know some of the people. We're getting to know the business owners around us. We're getting to know the people who work at the restaurants we frequent and go to, and we're getting to recognize people and talk to them and engage with them. And right, these aren't deep conversations that we're having. I mean, we need to work on those as well. But what they do is they give us this sense of, yeah, we're a part of a community. We're not isolated. We're part of a larger social network. And I think those types of things are really, really important, as well as making sure that we have time to engage deeply with people. There's other, I didn't read this, but the advisory also stated that the number of the people who reported the least, were least likely, are reported the least amount of loneliness, generally had the most number of close friends, usually over 3. And yet the average American claims that they have 3 or less good friends. And so it's not just we need to have the daily social interactions with the people we live around, but we also need to make sure that we have the deeper connections. And the other challenge that we face is when we work from home, right? I've been working from home for 20 years. One of the things I miss the most about not working in an office is the water cooler conversations. Right? Just the people you see that you don't have a deep relationship with, right? You're not solving their problems and doing all that stuff, but you're just engaging with them on a daily basis over what happened in the news yesterday, or what's going on in the neighborhood today, or what's coming up in the community this next week, and just these water cooler conversations. And I really miss those. And so, as you've heard me say before, I actually am now renting some space in a co-working space. And one of the main reasons I go to the co-working space, is to both, first of all, to separate my work life and my home life a little bit, but B, to have the water cooler conversations. So I have a growing number of people in my office who I recognize. I don't work with them or for them or even alongside them, but we work in the same space. We say hello, we chat about what happened over the weekend, we ask how each other's families or kids are doing, and we just have these lighter conversations. And I love that. I love those kind of social interactions, and those are so necessary, right? We as people, we're social beings. This is why when we have these high numbers of loneliness, it has this devastating effect on our health. And the challenge is the more lonely you get, typically you can want to be even more antisocial. You lose energy to talk with people or to engage or to initiate those types of conversations. And so it can be almost like a perpetual, a kind of a snowball effect. The more lonely you get, the less likely you are to engage with someone more deeply. And so I want to take this podcast to acknowledge the problem that we're facing and to encourage people to step out of your comfort zone, to say hi to someone. You don't have to hear their whole life story. Just say good morning, to acknowledge people, to choose to take your earbuds out when you're walking down the road, to look for people who you recognize and acknowledge them with a wave or a hello or even a nod, right? And just begin to slowly build some of our social networks again. We really, if we want to reverse this epidemic trend of loneliness, it starts by recognizing living in our technological bubbles, living in our Bluetooth bubbles is not what is best for us. Right? It doesn't, in the long run, it doesn't help us. Not that it's not good to have these things. And one of the things I'm learning a lot, and even this week, I've made some very intentional decisions to cut down my distractions when when I'm working. Be less available on social media, be less available with text, be less available with phone calls, so I can focus on what I'm doing and get more accomplished, get more done, right? When we're constantly on social media, we're constantly answering phone calls or answering texts or doing things like that, then we can tend to be less productive. But if we're more focused during our work time, then we'll be more productive, and then we can actually even be more focused in our non-work time with investing in and connecting with relationships and people around us, and even have more energy for that. So anyway, I welcome people to give me feedback on this, and please feel free to comment on here. Shelley, I'm looking at your comment right now. Listening is necessary for engagement. We use our bubble as a defense mechanism. You're absolutely correct, right? Just having the earbuds out and being able to hear the world around us and engage with people, where someone could call our name or say, hey, does anyone, whatever, right? We can actually be, and even just to have the chit chat with the cashier at the store, or the person taking our order at the fast food restaurant, or the barista at the coffee shop, right? Just to be able to intentionally engage. When we have our earbuds in and we're not listening, then we're not going to be able to engage. And so I think you're absolutely right. And Russell, you're right. There is so much about the Native community, where we have these community events, right? We have these dances and these gatherings, and that's much more a part of the Native culture, right? Western European culture is so hyper individualistic. And there are a lot of aspects of Native culture where it's about gathering in community and being together, whether it's for dances or for meals or other things like that. And we need to continue to do those sorts of things and to embrace those sorts of things. So yeah, there's a lot of things that I really think would be good for us. Anyway, my relatives, those are my thoughts. I thank you for taking a few moments here to listen to me talk about these things. I want to share with you, YouTube came out with a new feature about a week. Well, I saw it a week ago. Maybe they came out with it earlier, but they're kind of changing YouTube a little bit. And there's now a place where you can designate one of your playlists as a podcast. And so I have a playlist on my YouTube channel for my second cups of coffee that I usually share. And now it's actually on their podcast list. And so if you want to link to that, it gives you it gives you access to all of the second cups of coffee I put up on my YouTube channel over the past 3 years. And I welcome you to find episodes there. It's a great way to kind of go back and listen to episodes that I've done a few weeks ago. I also want to share again, just if you want to download my YouTube, my second cup of coffee as a podcast, we submit it through the Spotify podcasting app, but it goes out to all of the major podcast apps. Sometimes I refer to it as my second cup of coffee to go, because you can just take it with you and listen to it. But anyway, there's the link for that there. And then I also want to share with you the link to my Patreon. If you like the work I'm doing, you like the conversations I'm trying to engage in, and you want to somehow support the work that I'm doing, I don't monetize my social media, but I do have my subscription service on podcast. I mean, on Patreon, where if you want to subscribe to me there, you can take the conversation deeper. And actually today I'm going to be doing the presentation for March for my Decolonizing Faith tier. At 8 p.m. tonight on my Patreon, the Decolonizing Faith tier, I'm going to be having a discussion about why we need to decolonize Sunday school. And why? Because Sunday school is all about simplifying the scriptures and the faith for children. That actually creates a legacy of teaching them false things. and it oversimplifies some very difficult and complex teachings of the faith that leads to a lot of the challenges we face as the church faces today, because they've tried to oversimplify them for the sake of children. So anyway, I'm talking today about decolonizing Sunday school, and I'll be sharing those thoughts on my my Patreon channel this evening, 8 p.m. Eastern time. But my relatives, thank you for joining me today. I hope your second cup of coffee is as good as mine is. I'm grateful for this time we could spend together. Walk in beauty, my relatives, and may we all learn how to walk in beauty together. Hakone.